Five.
Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. I'm Brian Morgenstern here with Sam Lyman. You can follow us on X at MorgensternNJ at Sam Lyman 33. Remember to like and subscribe the pod if you enjoy what you hear today. A lot going on in politics, and Bitcoin Congress is back for a few weeks. We'll see what they can do, if they can even fund the government. Who knows? But there's a lot to dig into today. So, Sam, where would you like to start?
Yeah, I'll give everyone a quick overview today. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin voters, corporate treasuries, and mass censorship on social media. But let's start with corporate treasuries. So, Brian, we have an exciting announcement with our own company, Riot Platforms. We recently just reached a huge milestone in owning over 10,000 Bitcoin. So, Dylan, do you mind pulling up that announcement from Bitcoin Magazine? This is a thrilling announcement for our industry because we join a small handful of companies that own over 10,000 Bitcoin. This is an exclusive club that includes the likes of Coinbase, Tesla, and of course, MicroStrategy that owns more Bitcoin than most nation states. So it's a great and exciting to be part of that small handful of companies that have reached those echelons of Bitcoin ownership. And here's just another good sampling of public companies that own Bitcoin. You can see right, is climbing its way up there. So very exciting for our industry. And it's bullish, of course, for Riot, the company, as well as the Bitcoin industry itself. And Brian, to start, can you unpack why that is today and why companies like our own are looking at holding more and more Bitcoin?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a variety of things companies can hold on their balance sheets, but one of the best performing assets of the last decade, if not the best performing asset, is Bitcoin. So when you see the erosion of the value of the dollar, it is a better store of value to have it on your balance sheet. And River Financial just did a report on this, actually, and they found there are a number of reasons why companies are doing this, primarily to store value in a way that's more reliable than the dollar, perhaps more reliable than Treasuries return. It gets greater returns than most investable assets. And so it really is a smart play to have a lot of Bitcoin on your balance sheet, or at least some Bitcoin on there. And but they have other uses for it as well. Some employees of various companies prefer to get paid in Bitcoin. It's easier for cross-border transfers if you have a multinational business operation. So River really dug into the reasons and found that there are a variety of them. But I think it kind of boils down to a great Michael Saylor quote when he said, "You may spend," I'm paraphrasing rather than quoting, but he basically said that you're going to spend tens of thousands of hours becoming an expert in something and figuring out how to earn dollars. It would make sense to spend some amount of time figuring out how to keep them. And in his journey, he found that Bitcoin is the best way to do that. And that's why his company, a previously sort of a small, mid-size, I guess, software company, is now really sort of a Bitcoin bank. And he, like you mentioned, Sam, MicroStrategies owns more Bitcoin than most countries. It's one of the top probably three Bitcoin holders in the entire world. And he's gone from a relatively small company to, entering some of the indexes. And it's really a testament to, his foresight. And I think Riot and other companies in the space are seeing the wisdom of that. And I think more companies are coming into the space and putting more Bitcoin on their balance sheet, and that's what River is seeing. They're projecting tremendous growth in this strategy. So I think really, really bullish signal and very positive.
Yeah, bullish as well because you can often tell where we are in a market cycle by the behavior of Bitcoin miners. So oftentimes during the bear market, Bitcoin miners are selling their Bitcoin as fast as they mine them. Why? Because they just need to cover the overhead costs of running their company. But more often in a bull cycle, when you see Bitcoin miners holding on to their Bitcoin, moreover, when you see Bitcoin whales of any kind holding on to their Bitcoin, that's a very clear signal that they have an expectation of increased appreciation over the next couple of years. And so for that reason too, it's also a bullish signal. Now, to put this 10,000 number in perspective, I'd like to pull up a chart that shows just how much Bitcoin certain nation states own. Dylan, can you bring up that chart? So, of course, the United States owns more Bitcoin than any other country, which is one reason why Donald Trump has talked about making a strategic Bitcoin reserve, because we're already leading that race. And then it's followed by China, the UK. And one important thing to note, this chart is now outdated because Germany over the summer sold all of its Bitcoin, which we believe in time will prove to be a big own goal. And then if you see at the very end of that chart, in fifth place is tiny little El Salvador, which, though it's a small country, it definitely punches above its weight in Bitcoin and technological innovation. Under Bukele, they've really made it a focus to move on to a Bitcoin standard and to innovate as much as possible and bring technologists to their country with tax incentives and other reasons. And so what's fascinating about El Salvador being the fifth highest nation state holder of Bitcoin is that Riot now actually owns about twice as much Bitcoin as El Salvador itself. So here you have this country that's dedicated the lion's share of its best minds and its innovative resources to becoming a Bitcoin first country. Even then, Riot and some other companies have twice as much Bitcoin as a nation state, which again is bullish for the industry and for companies that have a lot of Bitcoin on their balance sheet. If the thesis plays out that Bitcoin really does become a universally recognized store of value and in many places a monetary asset, just like the dollar is today, then these companies that hold Bitcoin on their corporate treasuries will be like nation states in terms of their buying power, in terms of their vast wealth and resources. So really interesting strategy, really exciting news. And it speaks to what I call the micro strategization of corporate America. So that is the idea that more and more companies will copy MicroStrategy's strategy in buying more Bitcoin and holding for the long term. Now, it's possible as well that that strategy will scale up onto the nation state level. That in the same way that it might be beneficial for companies to hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet, it could be beneficial for countries to do so as well. So Brian, I'm curious from your angle, as you look at this micro strategization of corporate America and potentially countries themselves, do you see that as a viable thesis playing out over the next decade or so? And do you think that's something that will happen simultaneously, where both companies and countries concurrently buy Bitcoin and store it on their balance sheets? Or do you think it has to be companies first and then countries?
Well, I think I do think, the future is coming. I mean, Senator Cynthia Lummis from Wyoming has already introduced the Bitcoin Act to create a U.S. Strategic Bitcoin reserve. So those conversations are happening. She's looking for co-sponsors. That's a very important step in the process. I do think that corporate America tends to innovate faster than government. And so I think it may take a little bit longer. There's usually some lag time between innovations that companies do and what governments eventually adopt. So I think it's a little bit staggered. I think you're going to see companies do it, and then governments kind of dipping their toe in, and as companies do it more and become stronger, governments adopting it more. So I do think that the private sector is going to lead, but I think that governments will soon come to the same realization that most people do in their Bitcoin journey, which is that at some point you don't want to miss out. FOMO is a powerful motivator, but then when market forces back it up, I think at some point the governments are going to have to try to catch up. So I see the private sector leading, but governments following hopefully soon thereafter.
Yeah, I feel the same way, Brian. It seems like the private sector is leading out on this, but discerning politicians are paying attention, Donald Trump being one of them. To his credit, he recognized the value of Bitcoin a few months ago, and now since that time, he's all in on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And honestly, Bitcoin and crypto voters have taken notice. Do you mind pulling up that next link, Dylan? So this is an interesting report that shows that cryptocurrency voters are more likely to support Donald Trump than Kamala Harris. Honestly, we've seen this trend playing out over the past few months, and it's not a huge surprise, but there still is a lot to unpack there. Brian, what do you make of this recent report and the current state of the campaign right now?
Well, it's sort of proving a concept that we've discussed several times, and just in our last episode, I know we talked about some of the voter data that shows that Bitcoin owners, crypto voters tend to be younger, more diverse, less loyal to a party. Over time, voters tend to have chosen a party and then stick with it for the duration of their voting careers. But we're looking at a voting bloc that hasn't necessarily chosen a side. They're not necessarily brand loyal yet. They are persuadable voters. And so when you have one candidate presenting a clear contrast in the form of support for innovation in America, support for these alternative assets versus legacy institutions. Um, I think the voters and the political donations are following suit. That was kind of the thesis for a lot of the folks who donated to our project, the Bitcoin Voter Project, as well as Coinbase's project, Stand with Crypto. They believed that these voters are persuadable. They're not super partisan. They are kind of down the middle. You can get their attention with this single issue that's very important to them. Uh, sort of based on the dissatisfaction with legacy institutions and a techno optimism for a more sort of future with more individual empowerment. That thesis is playing out. So we're seeing the people who are invested in this space, who are interested in it, are looking at where the politicians stand, and then they're behaving, in accordance with those incentives. So Trump came out hard in favor of these things. The Biden administration has been very hostile. The Harris campaign has not they've signaled that they might be more friendly than Biden, but they haven't really told us why or what they would do differently. So there's a lot of skepticism towards their side. Whereas on the Trump side, like I said, it's sort of unabashed, positive language with a pretty clear agenda that they'll allow self-custody, they'll allow mining Bitcoin in the US, they'll um, stop a regulatory crackdown that's really been very aggressive under the Biden administration. So I think this polling data is kind of proving that the thesis had merit, that there is some there. And, if an election is like the last two, which is that it's 70 or 80,000 voters across like 4, 5, 6, 7 states, in other words, a really small slice of the electorate, if they end up trending in one direction because of Bitcoin and crypto, and it looks like they are, this could really be a difference maker in this election. So just more data coming out that shows that our hypothesis seems to be, it's being proven correct. I think that's a really optimistic sign. I think it's a very important signal for politicians to be paying attention to. And it's not necessarily a Republican versus Democrat issue forever. I think in this election, at the presidential level, it seems to be. In congressional races, it's really very bipartisan. Younger Democrats tend to be supportive. Older politicians, Republicans and Democrats, tend to be more skeptical. But this is a key voting block. I think it's showing the power of the Bitcoin voter and the crypto voter in this election. Really could make a difference as to who wins or loses and who gets to run the government for the next 4 years. So just really incredible stuff coming out. Like I said, the hypothesis is being proven. We've been saying it for a long time. The people who believed us seem to be benefiting. The people who didn't seem to be falling behind.
Yeah. It's incredible to see the blueprint become reality. I remember it was around this time last year, Brian, that you said we need to make the case to a leading presidential candidate that if they embrace crypto and Bitcoin, they could very well win the election. We did the research. We sent a memo to the Trump team because they were the most open to it. And lo and behold, it's playing out in real time. You were exactly 100% right. Bitcoin could very well sway this election. The more polls that come out, the more it seems to be the case that this could really be a deciding factor for not just a couple thousand or 10,000 voters at the ballot box, but really millions of voters, including in swing states. And so it's a complete self-own on the Democratic Party's part that they've made themselves so radioactive to this industry. It's really quite unfortunate. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is taking advantage. He's actually taking his crypto and Bitcoin talking points and he's weaving them into his broader economic agenda. Dylan, do you mind pulling up that next clip? So this actually just happened today. This was a speech that Trump was giving on the economy, not necessarily just crypto. So this is a general audience of bankers and other people who are business owners, people who have a general stake in the economy, not a crypto specific audience. And at this speech, Donald Trump talked about the importance of enacting favorable regulation, embracing crypto and Bitcoin. Instead of attacking these industries of the future, we will embrace them, including making America the world capital for crypto and Bitcoin. So really exciting news there. Again, Donald Trump has taken the orange pill and he now is in the process of orange pilling other people, it seems. So that is really bullish news for the industry. Brian, do you have any additional thoughts on the state of the race right now? And if we'll see anything from Kamala between now and November beyond lip service with regards to Bitcoin and crypto?
Well, that's an important point that he was announcing this support. I was previously announced it, but the fact that this was in his major economic policy address to the Economic Club of New York, which is Wall Street. We're talking about a lot of traditional finance, and he's announcing to their faces that I want innovation to be here in the U.S. That is a very Trumpian thing to do, to go right into the lion's den and tell them that we need to innovate here. So really sort of just an aggressive, in a positive way, very aggressive move to make and stance to take. In terms of your question about the Harris camp, now there's this Crypto for Harris group that's trying to organize some grassroots efforts on the I don't know if it's pro-Trump, but pro-innovation Senate candidates for sure, probably a bit ancillary beneficial to Trump. They're trying to go after about 4 million voters across 5 swing states. They're doing a bus tour, they're doing events. So they see this as a pivotal issue in swing states. The Crypto for Harris camp, I think, is a little less organized. They have less to work with because the candidate has not been talking about these things. There seems, in my opinion, seems to be some wish casting on this group's part. They want Harris to get elected and they want her to be pro crypto, but they don't really, they're pretending to think, or they're pretending to believe that she really is pro Bitcoin and pro crypto, notwithstanding all the evidence to the contrary based on the behavior of the Biden administration and the advisors that she's hired on the campaign. It's a lot easier for the industry to go in for Trump because he's been so clearly supportive and Harris has been dancing around the issue. So we'll see how this plays out. Here we are in September for a November election. Early voting is starting. Mail-in ballots are going out in certain states. Early voting in, for example, Virginia starts, I think, in 2 weeks. So we're entering the end stages of this race. I don't know that there's going to be major developments on this, perhaps some acts of desperation. If things start to go more in favor of Trump than Harris, maybe the Harris campaign starts to look for straws to grasp at. But right now, it really is the issue that Trump has seized upon, and he seems to be getting the benefit of it, as we had prognosticated, as we had predicted. Seems to be playing out. I think the Democrats are going to have to come along. It's just a matter of time, but they seem to be really dragging their feet at this point.
Yeah, they're very much behind on this issue. And Kamala, her approach to crypto is in keeping with her approach to other issues that her administration has been historically terrible on. I think the theme of her candidacy is listen to what I say, not what I do, because what she's saying right now is she will be pro innovation and vaguely alluding to the fact that she'll be pro crypto. But what she's done, she and Joe Biden have done over the past 4 years, is they've tried to push forward policies to drive the industry offshore, to make crypto almost impossible to build in America. And it's similar to how Kamala has approached the border as well. Historically, this administration has had an abysmal record when it comes to keeping our border secure. Over 10 million illegal immigrants have flooded into the border since they took over back in 2021, which is over 3 times as many people who came through the border under the Trump administration. And now all of a sudden, Kamala Harris is putting herself out there as someone who will ostensibly be tough on border security. And she puts herself out there as someone who is an attorney general of a border state. And she said that she had a solid record when it came to border enforcement. People cannot believe this because they see the evidence clearly in front of them. And I think it's also a bad sign for the Kamala Harris campaign that up to this point, you might call them the copy paste candidacy. On so many different issues, they are literally just copy pasting the policy platform of the Trump administration. So a couple examples there would be the child tax credit. The Trump administration came out and said that they would increase the child tax credit. Just a few days later, the Kamala Harris campaigns came out and said that they would do the exact same thing. And so that's just one example among many others, including being stronger on the border, supposedly, that the Kamala Harris campaign is copying the homework of her competitor, which is a really bad sign for the campaign that they are not leading on almost any issue, on almost every issue they're following. They're interestingly trying to put themselves forward as almost a left of center, in some cases, even right of center campaign. They're in some cases embracing conservative talking points. It just shows you where the center of gravity is at right now in American politics, that the person who was formerly the most liberal senator in the Senate by according to GovTrack, is now putting herself forward as a moderate who actually has embraced certain conservative policy positions, if you want to call them that. So again, it's a bad sign. I don't think it's to be trusted. I'm always open to being surprised, but by the looks of it right now, the Kamala Harris campaign is not serious about changing its tune on crypto. But again, I'm open to being surprised if she were to become president. But like you said, Brian, eventually Democrats, something's got to give, because they don't gain anything politically by being against an entire industry that millions of Americans love.
Yeah, agreed. It's from their efforts to debank the industry, to try to create a Bitcoin mining registry and potentially take away access to electricity, to trying to regulate via court filing to end the right to self-custody your assets. I mean, you can go on and on. Blaming climate change on Bitcoin mining. I mean, really crazy positions that the current administration is taking. And she's kind of acting like it never happened, trying to memory hole it. So it's hard for voters to trust that. And I think that's why the voter data is showing what it's showing, which is that people in this industry and people and investors in Bitcoin and other digital assets, they're not believing it, because it defies the reality that they've lived for the last several years. So we'll see what happens in the campaign. Hopefully, they'll get the memo at some point. Trump has and completely changed his position, and now he's joining the techno optimists. So we had to get a foothold somewhere. We're glad that President Trump has come around. Hopefully, the Democrats will as well, but we just haven't seen the evidence there yet.
It's great that we've gotten a foothold with Donald Trump, and over time, we're starting to gain more of a foothold in Texas as well. So recently, this is huge news. We have secured a really important ally in the industry in Governor Rick Perry. Do you mind pulling up that tweet, Dylan? So, Brian, do you mind breaking this down for us and why this is so bullish for Bitcoin in Texas?
Yeah, so Texas, both chambers, the House and Senate in the state capitol, and of course the governor, Governor Abbott, are all Republicans, but they don't all share the same opinion on Bitcoin and crypto and on the mining industry and whether or not it should thrive in Texas. So it really is a huge development to see the Speaker of the Texas House, Dade Phelan, bringing in former Governor Rick Perry to be an advisor to him in this next legislative session. And that is very bullish for Bitcoiners, because Rick Perry, as far back as 2015, had said that there needs to be, more regulatory breathing room for these innovators. And then just in the last couple of years, he was exuberant in welcoming a tech, blockchain firm to Austin. So Dylan, you can throw up that news article there. So he is very pro innovation. He's pro business. He wants Texas to be the leader here. And now to see this former governor advising the current speaker, um, that is a really, really positive sign in terms of what may come of the next legislative session. So I think Bitcoiners should be very pleased with this announcement, very optimistic about it, that there's going to be some more positive voices at the highest levels of the Texas government. And that's important because more than half the public mining hash rate in the country, I believe, is in Texas. It is the leader of the nation in Bitcoin mining, and that helps the US be the leader of the world in Bitcoin mining. So this is a very, very significant development, a really positive one for the industry, and very welcome news today as we get closer to the next legislative session, which starts in the new year, 2025.
Yeah, and it should be noted as well that in addition to being the former governor of Texas, Rick Perry was the former Secretary of Energy. So the current Secretary of Energy is not pro Bitcoin. She tried to impose a forced audit of all Bitcoin miners across the country. Secretary Perry, though, of course, Bitcoin wasn't a major issue when he was in office, but it is promising that a former Secretary of Energy recognizes the value of this commodity, recognizes the benefit it can be to the grid, recognizes the importance of Bitcoin in being an anti-CBDC and being an asset that will give Americans autonomy from an inflating dollar and from people who might not have their best interests at mind. So really positive news for the industry as a whole, especially in Texas, as we head into the next legislative session next year. So a couple other items to discuss today, Brian. We have seen a massive effort across the world, really, to crack down on free speech, specifically with platforms such as Telegram and Twitter. So for those who are just catching up right now, the CEO of Telegram was recently charged with multiple crimes in France. They accused him of being party to essentially any crime that took place on the Telegram app. Now, for those who don't know, Telegram is used by tens of millions of people across the world in the same way that iMessage is used by tens of millions of people across the world, in the same way that Gmail is used by tens of millions of people across the world. Now, on those platforms, iMessage and Gmail, are there people doing things that could fall under the category of illicit activity? Yes. Are the CEOs of those companies held responsible by nation states, foreign governments? No. So it's really interesting that the CEO of Telegram has been held responsible, is being charged for multiple crimes that he didn't commit, but people using his platform committed. So what's really disturbing is that there's now a massive crackdown from different foreign governments on the use of X within their countries. So we saw this most prominently in Brazil. Brazil has banned X, the platform, in an ongoing spat between Elon Musk and one of the most powerful judges in the country. They have what seems to be a personal vendetta against each other. And in an ultimate act of pettiness, that judge pushed for X to be banned entirely in the country. A really disturbing development that you think something like this wouldn't be an issue in the United States. Yet, lo and behold, we have Kamala Harris flirting with the idea of censoring speech on X, in some way regulating what she calls misinformation or disinformation on free speech platforms like X and Telegram and others. Brian, this is a really disturbing development. And again, it seems to be a campaign position that would just hurt Kamala in the long run. But what do you make of this global crackdown on free speech, especially Kamala Harris's targeting of Elon Musk and X?
Yeah, it's pretty scary. And she was advocating for, getting Donald Trump banned from Twitter when she was running for president in 2019 and 2020. This is a really critical issue because there are a lot of middle of the road, pretty mainstream, moderate voters who really do understand that free speech is necessary to a functioning democracy. Having a ministry of misinformation is downright Orwellian and is, a step on the march to authoritarianism. And I think that's a big reason why RFK Jr. Ended up coming over to Trump's side because Dylan, you can throw up that clip of RFK Jr. giving a speech. This is when he was dropping out of the presidential race. Shortly after that, he wound up um, kind of joining the Trump campaign, I think informally, but announcing his preference is that Trump get elected because, in his words, the Democratic Party has become the party of censorship, among other things, warmongering, other issues that he cares about, catering to big pharma, where he's a big health advocate. But censorship was right there, featured prominently in this speech that he gave, and in many subsequent interviews. He gave one with Tucker Carlson. He gave one with the All In podcast. He's done a variety of talks where he's discussed this issue as critically important. If voters don't feel that their voice is being heard, then we really are at a critical juncture in terms of the American experiment. So I think this issue has the potential to be another key wedge in this election. I think it's one where Kamala Harris historically has been firmly on the wrong side of it, particularly in the eyes of voters who are not particularly partisan. So could be another difference maker. I think it's a really important one that if Brazil is able to get away with kicking X out of the country because they don't like dissent or they view information that's unfavorable to them as misinformation, Brazil's a huge country. Hundreds of millions of people live there. If they're able to get away with it, I think that would present a blueprint for other Western countries to try similar measures. I think they have to be just thoroughly lampooned and disgraced for such an action. And we need to show American politicians that we're not going to tolerate that here. And I think RFK Jr. jumping on the Trump train is a critical step in that. So really big developments in the world of censorship, and hopefully this gets pared back and resolved in a reasonable way. You cannot be shutting down platforms because you don't like what people are saying on them. Setting aside, open, overtly, like criminal behavior that, generally people shouldn't tolerate that, but you can't have thought crimes. You can't be going after people for their political opinions. And that's really what appears to be happening. So, really important that Elon is highlighting this issue, and that others, like the writer of that op-ed, has shown that Kamala Harris seems pretty sympathetic to censorship. And that's one of the reasons RFK Jr. actually left the Democratic Party. I think it shows that this cuts across partisan lines and that voters are really paying attention. So another very important wedge issue in this election.
Yeah, like you said, Brian, I hope that this resolves itself peacefully. I'm worried, though, that foreign governments will continue to up the temperature. They'll continue to up the pressure on Elon Musk and other CEOs of these platforms, because we have actually politicians within the United States and former cabinet officials who are pushing for foreign governments to do exactly that. So for those who may not have seen, Robert Reich, he's a former Secretary of Labor under the Clinton administration. He actually published an op-ed recently urging foreign governments to arrest Elon Musk for what he claims would be violating their laws with regards to free speech, which in my opinion is such a cowardly, weaselly thing to say. I think Robert Reich recognizes that we have something here in the United States called the First Amendment. And under the First Amendment, Elon Musk is well within his rights. And so are the users of crypto who are simply exercising their free speech. So what he's doing is he's outsourcing his political prosecution to other countries who don't have the same favorable free speech laws, and encouraging them to arrest one of the most influential, impactful CEOs in the world. And to me, this is the height of cowardice. This is a craven little man who does not have the best interests of the country in mind, who is no friend or respecter of the Constitution. And I find it to be really disturbing. I think it's in line, too, with what we're seeing more and more as a dividing line in American politics. I would describe the biggest dividing line in American politics right now as being a group of people who cares about what is true and a group of people who cares about what is safe. So in that latter category, the people who care about what is safe, what keeps them safe, they've weaponized that concept of safety against free speech itself. That's where we get the term hate speech. Hate speech, at the end of the day, is just speech that these people don't like. Whereas people in the former category, people who care about what is true, they recognize the necessity of free speech in discerning the truth. With free speech comes a lot of information that isn't accurate, but also comes with free speech also comes the ability to suss out what is true and what isn't true. And it's the very bedrock of our democracy. Democracy is built on the idea of deliberation, and deliberation is only possible if people can freely and openly speak their minds and debate the facts. And the fact that we have a leading presidential candidate for the United States coming out and indicating that she is pro censorship is a really disturbing development. And like you said, Brian, I think it will be one of those issues in this election that could well decide it between free speech, between Bitcoin. There's this appetite in our country for more freedom, for more ability to make individual choices. And there's one candidate at this point who clearly is on the side of freedom and another candidate who's clearly on the side of censorship. And Americans have a stark choice in front of them. And I just hope that they make the right choice.
Well, it really is sort of the people versus the system in a sense, and that's how Bitcoin ties back in here. Is that Bitcoin's about individual empowerment. You don't have to rely on a bank. You don't have to rely on a government to give you permission to hold assets or to transact. And that really plays totally into this issue of censorship. Bitcoin is censor resistant. So, for example, if banks decide that they don't like oil companies, or they don't like gun manufacturers, or they don't like certain types of businesses and they want to cut off services, well, Bitcoin kind of fixes that. It provides the sort of speech and associational rights that are supposed to be guaranteed under the US Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So it really kind of plays very well into this censorship debate. Censorship of speech is one thing with the platforms. Censorship of the freedom to transact and custody your own assets is another very important part of freedom. It's another issue that RFK Jr. talked about during his campaign that I think he's bringing to the Trump team, is this notion that we need to be empowering individuals and allowing the truth to come out, allowing open debate. Free speech doesn't exist for compliments, but that right doesn't exist for speech that everybody's comfortable with. It exists so that we can have uncomfortable conversations and, like you said, eventually get to the truth. So really important stuff. I think it ties all back into individual empowerment versus this kind of collectivism or dominance of the system. It's really power seeking versus freedom seeking is sort of the way it's framed in my mind, at least. So we'll see. It seems like voters are trending more in the direction of freedom seeking, which I think is very healthy for the country, and I hope that trend keeps up. We will see.
We will see. Yeah, I think that distills the division really nicely. Power seeking versus freedom seeking. And as Bitcoiners, we are very much in favor of the freedom seeking faction. So we can only hope for the best on that and continue to fight for the freedom to transact, the freedom to speak freely, and the freedom to essentially live our lives the way that the founders wanted us to be able to. So a lot that we covered today, Brian. Is there anything we're missing, or does that about round things out for today?
I think that rounds things out pretty well. Remember to like and subscribe. If you have questions for us, you want us to talk about any particular topics, you want to send us your beef. If you don't like something we've said, feel free. Follow us, like I said, on X at Morgenstern NJ, at Sam Lyman 33. We hope you like and subscribe and leave comments. And we will see you next time on the Peer to Peer Policy Pod.